Want to get into archery? Don't really know how? This is where you need to be. What's going on, everybody? It's Rhett with Feeding the Family Outdoors. Guys, you know, a lot of people have been asking me about getting into archery. You know, what do I do? What are the steps? You know, they'll ask me about vocabulary and everything, and I really wanted to take the chance to kind of break it down. No, I'm not an expert. I've been shooting bows for a long time, but I wanted to take a chance just to break it down to where people can really get into archery without being intimidated by it. So this is going to be the first part of a series that we're going to do. It's going to start out with getting into archery, how to buy your stuff, what to be looking for, your vocabulary that's common with archery, and then moving all the way into becoming a bow hunter if that's what you want to do. So let's start with your common vocab. So whenever you're first starting to get into archery and you go into a pro shop, or maybe even like Bass Pro, Dick's Sporting Goods, all your other retailers that will carry bows, there's certain questions that you'll have to ask, or there's certain terminology that you may hear and you don't really know what that's about. So I wanted to break those down a little bit. It's like some of those words that you might hear would be your draw length, your draw weight, your ATA, which is your axle to axle. You also have brace height for different bows, your IBO speed or your ATA speed. Those are both about the same thing. And you also have your let off. So we'll break this down so that it's easier whenever you are in the pro shop, you're not intimidated. So the first thing we'll go over is going to be your draw length. So each person, your anatomy is different, right? So everybody's arms are longer, and the draw length has to do more or less with your frame, how you're built, and it has to do with whenever you're drawing that bow back, how far you actually need to be able to pull it back. Each bow is going to have a settings or a range of draw length. Most adults fall anywhere between, I'd say, 26 inches up to about 31, 32 inches, 31 inches. That's about your normal range. So with draw length, the way that you find that out is you actually would measure your wingspan, and you could get someone to help you, and you measure from your fingertips to fingertips with your arms spread completely wide, and then you can divide that by 2.5. That's one of your easiest ways to find out draw length. So then you can take that number and you can go into a pro shop and you can ask them, say, listen, I have a draw length of about this length, let's say, 28.5. Do you have any bows that fit that? And they'll be able to point you in the direction, and that way you can start narrowing down. Instead of having 100 bows to look at, then maybe that narrows you down to 50 bows, because some of them might be youth or different things like that. Secondly, let's talk about your draw weight. Those kind of go hand in hand whenever you're talking about bows. So draw weights is measured in pounds, and it's another variation that is used for bows, and it's used whenever you're selecting bows. So your draw weight is going to be the amount of poundage that it takes for whenever you first are holding that compound bow to when you're pulling it back to full draw. That's your poundage that you're actually using through there. Depending on what you're wanting to use that bow for, if you're using it for target or field archery, you might use a lower poundage. But whenever you're looking at hunting, whitetail, stuff as big as elk, moose, things like that, then you want to be able to get your poundage as high as possible, because your poundage and your arrow speed, those go hand in hand. So that's also going to be able to allow you to have more of a pass through whenever you're talking about larger game. So your draw weight varies between about 15 pounds starting out with children's and youth bows, all the way up to 70 pounds when you're talking about hunting bows. Different manufacturers of bows allow the adjustments for those differently. Some use a cam system where you change out an actual piece, and some of them actually just have a variation of, or a bracket of how much weight each bow will do. So like 50 to 70 pounds, 40 to 50 pounds, somewhere along there, and you would actually tighten down different pieces of the bow to achieve the amount of poundage you want. That's another one of the things whenever you're getting into archery. a lot of people, they allow that ego to grab a hold of them, and they end up, they're shooting too much bow for when they're starting out. You're using muscles that you don't really use on a regular basis, and so it takes time to build that muscle up. So you don't have to start out shooting a 60-pound bow. And unfortunately for men especially, this is one of those times where you really have to check your ego. Make sure that you go into a pro shop and you try different poundage bows to explain to the salesperson that, hey, I've never shot a bow. I don't know what poundage. You know, maybe they would start you out at, if you're a man, maybe they'd start you out at around 40 pounds, 45 pounds, and see what that is. And you can always change it from there. But don't get sucked in to that ego-driven, oh, I'm going to pull the most poundage at the range, or I'm going to be the one that has the hardest pulling bow. Because if you do, yeah, can you shoot it? Maybe. But are you going to be able to shoot it the best of your ability? That's where it comes into factor. Because if you can't hold that bow steady at full draw for a couple of seconds without your arms start shaking, then it's not worth it. So next we'll move on to your axle to axle. So what that is it's actually measuring the length of the bow. So like this bow here, this is mine that I use for hunting. It's a Matthews Vertex. And whenever you're measuring your axle to axle, it's actually talking about from this point here, where your cam is, down to this point where your cam is. So this bow here is 30 inches axle to axle. My other bow, which is a Matthews ZXT, that's going to be a little shorter bow, and it's at 28 inches axle to axle. If you are a tall person and you have a really long wingspan, you may want to get a longer axle to axle bow. Doing so is going to make it, whenever you have that bow at full draw, you're going to have a larger angle with your bowstring. So if you're a taller person and you have a 31-inch draw or a 32-inch draw and you have a 28-inch bow, your string is going to be sitting something like this. It's a real steep angle. Whereas that's going to come into factor with your kisser button, if you use that, your peep sight, everything. But if you use it a longer axle to axle, then instead of being something along these lines, it could open it up for you. It gives you more forgiveness, a lot more comfort. You can line up your sights a lot better that way as well. So another thing, just really talk to the pro whenever you go into the shop. You might be wondering, what does axle to axle even have to do with anything? What does it matter if my bow is 28 inches or 35 inches? You know, well, that comes into the stability of the bow and how well you can maneuver that bow in tight quarters. So if you're using target, like let's say that you want to get into field archery, a lot of times you're going to want a larger axle to axle or ATA length. When that bow, when it's longer, you're going to, at full draw, it's going to be more stable. You're not going to have as much sway whenever you're longer ATA. Whenever you have a shorter one though, it's not as forgiving, so you have to be more precise with your shooting. But for instance, if you're shooting whitetail, hunting from a tree stand or a blind, that shorter axle to axle is what you want, because it's a lot harder to be in a tree stand with a 35, 36-inch bow than it is for me to be in there with my 30-inch Vertex. One of those things, again, whenever you're going into a pro shop, that you can talk to them about and say, hey, I've heard about axle to axle. What would you suggest if I'm getting into field archery? Or what would you suggest if I'm wanting to go out west and hunt elk? You know, so that's just another bit of that vocabulary that you can have in your toolbox going into the pro shop. Next, we'll talk about brace height. So brace height is the distance between your handle and your string on your bow. So you looking at my Matthews again here. Take my quiver off so that you can actually see everything. So your brace height, it's talking about the distance between here at the furthest part of your neck on your handle to here. That's it. That's what your brace height is about. So brace height normally averages between 5 inches, 4 inches to about 8 inches or 9 inches. That's kind of your range. Some bows have less, some have more. With your brace height, that goes back again to what kind of shooting you're doing, what kind of archery do you really want to get into, and how much forgiveness do you want. So a higher brace height, which would mean that the neck of your handle and the distance from your bowstring are longer, that's going to give you more forgiveness. The reason for that is whenever your arrow is coming through and it stops back here, there's less time for you as the archer to interfere with that arrow flight. So you have to have good form always, but with a longer brace height, you don't have to be as good as you do if you have a shorter one. Vice versa though, that shorter brace height, that arrow is on that string longer, and that string is pushing that arrow more, so you're going to have a higher speed with that arrow flight. Normally your target bows are going to have a brace height between 7 to 9 inches. And then your hunting bows, because you want more speed most of the time, you're talking about between 5 to 7 inches. That's your average. And again, some manufacturers, they go less and they go more. But that's another thing that you will definitely see whenever you're looking at your different bows. They'll have the listing of your draw length, your draw weight, your axle to axle, and they're also going to have your brace height. Next, we'll talk about ATA and IBO speed. So ATA stands for Archery Trade Association, and IBO stands for International Bow Hunters Organization. So both of these groups have come together to put a standard speed measurement on bows whenever they're selling them. And what this is it's a set criteria whenever they're testing the bows when they're first manufactured. So the higher that number, it's saying that the bow is shooting faster. Now that's measured in feet per second, and then it's also measured at point blank distance. So that is as soon as that arrow is leaving your rest, that's where that measurement comes from. So whenever you have your bow, let's say that it says it has a 345 IBO. So it's traveling 345 feet per second at a set arrow weight, arrow length. That's what that velocity of that bow is shooting. When you buy that bow and you set your arrows in it, and let's say you're shooting a 28-inch arrow and you are shooting a 125 grain tip on there, your IBO speed is going to be lower than that. So keep that in mind, because again, that is at point blank with set standards of I want to say on a 30-inch draw is where that measurement is taken from. Just keep that in mind. But if you're going after hunting, if that's what you're starting in archery for, you do want your higher IBOs, because the higher it is, even if you're wanting to shoot a heavier arrow so that you have more hit whenever you make contact with that animal, then you're still wanting a higher speed so that it doesn't slow it down but so much as you add that weight to the arrow. Next big thing is let off. Let off is measured in a percentage, and let off is the reference to as you are pulling the poundage of your bow, when you get to full draw, what does that percentage of the max weight that you're pulling, what does it let off to so that you can hold your shot for longer? So let's say that you're shooting a 70-pound bow with an 80% let off. So what that means is that full draw, so during your draw cycle, you're pulling 70 pounds. But then that 80% kicks in, and at the back, you're only holding 14 pounds of pressure. So it makes it a lot easier to hold that shot for longer as you acquire your target and your sights and you squeeze off your shot. Whereas with long bows and recurves, you have that constant pressure. If it's a 50-pound recurve bow, when you're back anchored, you're holding every bit of that. That's where your compound with the use of cams, that's where that comes into play, is your percent let off. So that's another part of when you're looking at your bows to buy, the higher that percentage let off, the easier it is to hold that bow for a long time. So now that we've kind of gone over those things, that kind of gives you a base of vocabulary that you can take with you so that you're not intimidated when you go into that pro shop and you start looking at bows to purchase. So now that we've got the vocabulary down where you can go into the pro shop, not be intimidated, and kind of have an idea about what you're talking about, let's look at some other aspects of whenever you're first buying a bow. So when you talk about different brands, you are getting into a pretty broad spectrum of prices, from dealing with about $200 all the way up to maybe even $3,000. Again, it has to do with what you're wanting to get into with your archery and preference too. A lot of those things you can read about your different bow brands. You can read about the pros and cons. One thing I would suggest is find you a pro shop that has a couple different brands. Go in and shoot the different bows. Don't go in, let someone suck you into one brand or another. Take the time and put a bow in your hand and shoot different ones. If you only shoot one bow, you only know what that bow feels like. You don't know what anything else feels like. So then you have different things that come into play, like the grip on that bow, how much torque would be put into the handle or into the entire bow whenever you're holding it, because different manufacturers design their grips differently. You also have to think about what's called the back wall. So when you're drawing that bow back, whenever you come all the way back to your anchor point, some bows you can still flex them a little bit. Other bows, they have a solid wall. So whenever you have a back wall that's more firm or rigid, then you have more consistency across your shots, which increases your accuracy, right? So again, your price range, whenever you're looking at them, it depends on your budget. Talking about between $200-300 up to $2 or $3 grand. Some people like the motto of, well, I'm gonna buy a bow just real quick to see if I like it. So they only spend a couple $100. Nothing wrong with that. If that's your way of thinking, if that's your budget, go with it. But again, try different bows. Don't try just one bow and then shoot that bow. You get frustrated with it and you put it down. Archery is a great thing. There is a lot of cost at first, but it's something that can be enjoyed by the whole family. And it's something that once you get your initial setup, it's not as expensive as something like shooting guns all the time. I love guns myself, but my heart and passion is with archery. I think it takes a lot more skill whenever you're talking about hunting and stuff. So it's just one of those things, but it's a great thing that you can get young children in. You can get your wives in. If you're watching this and you want to get your husbands into it, it's great for everybody. So talking about guns, bows are a little different than that. So a gun, I can shoot a rifle with iron sights. I can pass it off to a friend of mine and say, hey, I love this gun, try it out. And they can shoot pretty much the same. Yeah, scopes, there are a little variation between your length and your depth of that and stuff. But for the most part, a gun can be passed on to another person and they can be pretty accurate with it. Bows are not like that. Bow is very shooter specific because of what we talked about earlier with the draw lengths and the draw weights. Everything about a bow is built to you as the shooter, 100%. So it's not something that you can, you could save money by buying something off of Craigslist or Let Go or any other platform where people are selling stuff all the time. All I would say is just be careful with that. If you're going to do something like that, I would suggest going to a pro shop first, getting measured 100% with your draw length, get an idea of what draw weight you need. Then if you want to try to save some money by purchasing secondhand, I'm all for it. But do not just buy a bow because your buddy is selling one without having any knowledge before that. When you first are getting into archery, you may want to think about getting a longer bow with a longer brace height. It's like what we were talking about earlier, it's going to give you a lot more forgiveness as you're learning your technique and you're building up those muscles that you don't use on a regular basis. It's going to give you more forgiveness. So it's another variable to kind of keep in mind. Definitely don't have to, because I kind of like the idea of, buy once, cry once. So I do a lot of research on them. I might just put a good bit of money into it, but I'm not going to down the road say, oh, I don't like this and need to upgrade from that. It's just one of those things you might want to keep in mind. So if you are wanting to get into bow hunting though, think about what kind of hunting you're doing. If you're doing hunting from a stand or hunting from a blind, you may want to go a little bit shorter. You don't have to go down to a 28 inch, but maybe not 35. Just think about it. So you've got your bow, you've done different research on it, you've talked to the pro, you've shot a couple different models, different brands, and you finally decided on this one bow. Now what? Well, now you got to start putting your different pieces on there. This can get expensive. Depends on what you're going to do, depends on what brands you go with. You can be spending a lot of money on your accessories for your bow. Before you go crazy with it, some of your big things that I think, if you have a tighter budget, some things that you should really focus on spending the bulk of your money on would be three main things. Your release, which is how you shoot the bow, your sight, and your rest that holds your arrow. Those three things I would really spend the bulk of your budget on, and then you can put other pieces here and there if you need to. You don't have to get everything at once. Those three things you definitely have to get right then. Also, you have to get a stabilizer. Let's start with releases. You have different kinds of releases. So you have a buckle release, which has a strap that goes around your wrist. This is attached to you the entire time that you're shooting. It has a trigger on it, and that's how you actually release your arrow. You would have to depress your trigger. It would open up the jaws, it would attach to your D-loop, you would come back to full draw there, and then you would actually, like a gun, you'd have a trigger. With these, there is adjustability in the size of your strap, the length, and then the sensitivity of your trigger. All things to keep in mind whenever you're looking at them. Another nice thing, like with this TrueFire here, is some of them are able to fold out of your way. So you're not having to worry about that the whole time if you're pulling arrows or if you're doing other things other than shooting right that moment. So a second one is going to be your thumb handheld release. So this here is a blackout. We've done another videos on these. It's one of our first videos, so don't kill us on that. But so this here is a thumb handheld release, and this one's activated by, like what it says, a thumb. When you come to full draw, get to your anchor point, you'd squeeze your thumb and then it would activate your shot. These are great because they're not strapped to you the whole time. You can put them down. You can put it in your pocket. If you're hunting, this one here, you can leave it hooked onto your bow and you don't have to worry about it. Third kind of release that a lot of people are scared of is the hinge release. A lot of people are scared of these because they hear all these horror stories of people getting punched in the face, arrows flying all over the place, any and everything that you can imagine. People have heard it about hinge releases. But this is where your accuracy is. This right here will make you focus on your form more than anything else in archery. The way these are activated is once you have it on your D-loop of your bow, you come to full draw, then you start giving tension and it goes off. I like this one here. This is the TrueFire Ultra 4 Ultra Sweet Spot. The nice thing about this one is you don't have the chance of it going off while you're going into your draw. This one here has a thumb activated safety on it. So that goes down. You hook into your D-loop. You go to your full draw. Once you're set into your anchor, you activate that, and it can be done silently if you're hunting. So you activate that, then you would start squeezing your back muscles, squeezing, and your shot would go off. A beginning archer, I suggest that you try something like this. I personally would maybe look into the True Fire Ultra Sweet Spot because of that safety on there. You have other ones, Knock On, they have a back tension that has a safety on it, but there are multiple brands that do have a back tension with a safety. A true back tension with no safety, that can kind of get people uncomfortable because you have to worry about the whole time you're drawing it going off. But again, any kind of back tension is going to make you focus on your form. And it's going to make you a better archer. So I truly suggest back tension with a safety for beginning archers. So like I said before, the big three things that I would spend your budget on after you purchase your bow is your release, your sight, and your rest. So now let's talk about the sights. Starting out, I would suggest getting a stationary, easily adjustable sight. So what I mean by stationary is this here has multiple pins in the sight itself. So with this one here, it has 6 pins on it, which means that you could set it up for different yardages at 6 different intervals. But starting out, I would suggest getting something like this that has multiple pins on it that are easily adjustable, but it's stationary. That way, once you set it, you're focusing on your grip, your anchor point, squeezing off your shot, good follow through. You're focusing on every aspect of that shot, and it's taking the part of you having to adjust your pin up and down each shot, taking that variable out of it. Can you change it down the road? Yeah, very easily. That's not a problem. But I would just suggest starting out with something like this, stationary, and I would also go with a metal frame, something that's not going to break real easily if you happen to sit it down, or if you're leaning your bow over somewhere and it falls. If you have children like I do, I like to get stuff that's durable. So metal, stationary, good to go. So the third and last one for the bulk of that budget is going to be your arrow rest. You have multiple kinds for this. You have a stationary rest. You have what's called a whisker biscuit. It's a funny one. Whenever I first tell people, they're like, a whisker what? So a whisker biscuit is a ring. Some of them are solid all the way around. Most of them have a little cutout though. And it has bristles that are all the way around it. And it holds that arrow suspended in those bristles. I know people that have shot those for years. I've shot them in the past. Some people argue that they mess up the flight of the arrow. I was able to be accurate with them. But what that does is once that arrow is set in there, you don't have to worry about it falling off the rest. So that's a pro to if you're shooting that and you're hunting, moving around a lot. That's one of the options with that. What I shoot is a drop away rest. I suggest that to most people because it interferes with your arrow flight the least of anything. So again, here are my Matthews verdicts. I have the QAD, drop away rest. And so what this means is as you set your arrow in here, this little piece right here, it comes up, your arrow sits on it, and you have a cord that's attached on this one. It goes to your cable and it tightens up, and then it drops away, drop away rest, as your arrow flies through. So then you have no interference with your arrow flight at all. That one I believe is probably your most accurate because the less variables you have affecting that arrow flight, the better. Then you can start putting on your other things, and some things that you're going to need are a stabilizer. That's going to be going off the front of your bow, and that's going to add to whenever you draw back. It allows for more stability in your shot as you're acquiring your target. So you have many options whenever it comes to that, but you can find something really cheap when you're starting out. They will set up everything with that bow and have you ready to shoot within probably 30 minutes. Then you can start enjoying archery. So that right there just kind of gets you started. Gets you that vocabulary for going into the pro shop so you have a little bit of confidence in you. Gets you breaking down what bows do I want to look at. Then it gets you into a bow and what do I really need to be focusing my budget on just to get started. All right, well that's going to wrap up the first part of our 4 video series. Next videos are going to be taking you into shooting correctly. If you decide to go down the bow hunting side of archery, we're really going to dive into that. So make sure that you check back We're going to be getting those out here soon. But guys, if you like what you're seeing, hit that like button. Go ahead and subscribe for us. You know, we want to know what you're thinking, what you've gotten yourself into as far as archery with beginning and stuff. So leave us a comment. If you have a question, let me know. Maybe you started out in archery, you didn't like it, but maybe it was because of some of the mistakes that I spoke about earlier. Let me know what's going on. Maybe we can kind of figure those things out, steer you in the right way so that you too can start a passion with this. It's one of those things that once you get set in it, that, you know, you go back to it time and time and time again. But until next time, y'all stay safe, God bless, and we'll see you at the next video.